What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, and welcome to week number 3 of my weekly CFL football pick show for the 2025 CFL season and postseason, and we're a little bit closer to where we would like to be at the end of 2 weeks than we were at the end of 1. In a weird way, the fact that the total pushed in Winnipeg, BC was a blessing in disguise because it gave me a guaranteed week above 500. So you know what? Lock that in. We'll certainly take that. 6-5-1. So again, certainly better than the 4-8 that we were in week 1. 6-5-1, we'll take it. 3-1 straight up and 3-1 against the spread. Those are numbers closer to what we like to see. 5-3 now straight up on the season. Even money 4-4 against the spread. And stop me if you've heard this one before, but we're doing just fine anywhere but the totals. Means we're 1-6-1. So yes, while that is only 10-13-1 on the season, it's only 2 weeks in. We have a ton of runway left, and that gets started right now in week 3. In CFL Fantasy in week 2, I had probably the least deserved 100-point week in CFL Fantasy history. I got completely bailed out by the Saturday games because through the first 2 games of the week, I had nothing. I had in the 30s. I'm thinking to myself, this is where I crash and burn. Fantasy-wise. And if it wasn't for the Herculean performance of especially my MVP from week 2, who was Keyshawn Johnson, wide receiver for the Saskatchewan Roughriders, putting up a 26.4 spot at the receiver position, catching 8 balls for $124 and a touchdown, I pretty much would have been sank. But I got 102.4 points, 207.3 on the season. I did drop a little bit in the overall rank. I'm now down to 966, which is down 132 spots from last week. The top 500, you need a 231.2, and the top 250, a 247.4. So those are the numbers I'm chasing. But even though I did drop in the overall in CFL Fantasy, I did actually gain ground in both of the leagues that I'm in. The CFL Central Fantasy Football League, the biggest, I believe, CFL Fantasy Football League that's out there with 1,138 entries in this league. I actually jumped 48 places, which is kind of nice, and now up to 213 in that league. And in Christina Costable's league, Christina's league, I'm now at 104 out of 337. So that's a jump of 18 places. So I fell back in the overall, but I did gain some ground in my leagues. That sets us up for a week 3 slate of games as follows. The Montreal Alouettes are on the road in Edmonton, taking on an Elks team coming off of their bye. We've got the Saskatchewan Roughriders at 2-0, traveling to Toronto to face the 0-2 Argos. The 0-2 Ottawa REDBLACKS are facing the most surprising 2-0 team maybe in CFL history, the 2025 Calgary Stampeders. Ottawa's in Calgary for that game. And the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, fresh off of their season opening win in week 2, now travel to BC to take on the Lions in the encore. That means the 0-2 Hamilton Ticats and their many, many, many wonderful fantasy football toys are off this week. So that's no Bo, that's no Greg Bell, that's no Kenny Lawler. Who the hell is anybody going to have in their lineups this week? Let's start with that first game, the Alouettes in Edmonton taking on the Elks. Montreal 2-0 to start the season. Edmonton coming off of their bye after losing in week 1. And the Alouettes are rolling to start this season here in 2025. They're outscoring opponents 67-28 in the first 2 weeks. That is a margin of victory of plus 19.5. No line can compete with beating teams by almost 20 points a game. It's pretty incredible. And Davis Alexander averaging 9.5 yards per attempt in the pass game, which is a career high for the young Alexander. The defense is a +4 in the turnover ratio. They've got 5 quarterback sacks. They've also only allowed 74 yards and a single rush touchdown in 25 carries in their 2 games. It's pretty tough to run on the Alouettes. Nobody likes to do it, and this defense and this team as a whole is just humming along, the absolute beasts of the East. In Edmonton, it's a slightly different story. They're coming off their bye, which is obviously a good thing, but that's coming off of a 3-possession loss to the BC Lions back in week 1. That game was in BC. Not much went right in that game. They did go, I think, 2 for 3 in the red zone. So they did score touchdowns when they had the opportunities to, which is good. And they had a couple of stops on 3rd down, but I believe that came later in the game when the game was already kind of out of hand. So it's a nice stat, but I don't think it really contributed to much of anything. That's just an example of just about everybody on that roster needs to be better than they were in week 1. Now, this is the wrong opponent for that to be your need. Like, having to play Montreal the way Montreal has started this season, not exactly the team you want to be playing when you're like, boy, you know what we really need is a bounce back game. I think just about everybody's going to be pretty heavy on the Alouettes this week, and I am no different. We're going to grab Montreal on the road here in Edmonton to move to 3-0 on the season. Elks will still be seeking their first win of the year when they head into their game in week 4. On the line, Edmonton is taking plus 5.5 here as a pretty solid road dog. I like Montreal to cover that number. I mean, my God, it was like, again, plus 19.5 margin of victory is absolutely crazy. And I think you should just be laying points on the Alouettes until they give you a reason not to. I don't think that happens this week. Total in the game set at 48.5 points. I think I like the under here because, again, Montreal's defense is just humming along here to start the season. Yes, Trey Ford and what the Elks can do on the offensive side do obviously cause some matchup nightmares for opposing defensive coordinators. But this is, at this point, like a pretty objectively the best defense in the league, I think. So I think we still stay under this point total. Let's stay under the 48.5 point total in Montreal, Edmonton. Let's see here. I say we go, let's go like a 28-16. Does that do it? I think that'll do it for us. 28-16 was that. That's 44, so that stays under the point total. Montreal wins. We lay the 5.5 points on the Montreal Alouettes, and we take under the 48.5 point total. Up next, the undefeated Riders are in Toronto taking on an Argos team that is seeking their first win of the 2025 campaign. The Riders are back to kind of eking out competitive wins against opponents they're probably better than, which is their 3rd instance of that this season already is this game heading to Toronto. They've got an absolute 2-headed monster at wide receiver to start the season between Sam Emilus and Keyshawn Johnson. Johnson, who I mentioned, my fantasy MVP from last week. And I feel like Johnson is the more reliable of the two. I think Emilus might have a higher ceiling. I think Emilus will pop off for the bigger games. But then, like we saw last week, I think Emilus had a pretty quiet game in week 2. So I feel like Emilus is going to run more hot and cold, whereas I think Keyshawn Johnson is just kind of that, you know, a pretty reliable floor if you're looking for kind of the difference between the two. Either way, I think both of those guys are going to absolutely feed fantasy families, and their run defense has been incredible to start the season. Only 81 yards allowed on the ground in 2 games. In Toronto, I think it's a very simple story here to start 2025. They're not scoring. They're not scoring with Nick Arbuckle at quarterback. 14.5 points a game. That's good enough for 2nd worst in the CFL to start the season, only because Edmonton's only played 1 game. In addition to not scoring, and part and parcel to why they're not scoring, they've been wildly undisciplined with the football. Arbuckle's got 4 interceptions in the first 2 games of the year. That's part of 5 total turnovers as a team, and it's pretty much what I said in my season preview and kind of what I talked about a little in the preseason. It's not a good team if they don't have this hyper-efficient offense. This goes back to what I was talking about last year. The Argos found success because they were, for the vast majority of the season, the most efficient offense in the CFL. Not necessarily the most prolific, but definitely the most efficient. And when they're not that, which they haven't been to start the season, Nick Arbuckle's like the crown prince of empty yardage, they're not that high efficiency offense. And if they're not that, this is not a good football team. And they have not been a good football team to start the season. Even though the game's in Toronto, I don't see that changing until a change is made at quarterback. And it doesn't look like that's going to happen this week. I think Arbuckle is getting the start. So I'm pretty heavy on the Riders here on the road in Toronto. Let's take Sasky to beat the Argos. On the line here, Toronto's only taking plus 2.5 as a home dog. Minus 2.5 on the Riders on the road. I like them to win. It's a small price to pay. Let's lay the minus 2.5 on Saskatchewan. Total in the game set at 48.5 points. And once again, the Argos are not scoring. I don't trust the Argos right now, as they are right now, to get to 20 points on a good defense. And the Riders are definitely a good defense. So I got to take the under here. Under the 48.5 points in Saskatchewan, Toronto. Let's say we go, I'm going to go like Riders 27, Argos 14, something like that. Let's go like a 27-14. Riders win. Riders cover the minus 2.5 pretty comfortably. Give me an under on the 48.5 point total. Up next, the Ottawa REDBLACKS travel to Calgary to take on the Stampeders. Again, the Stampeders undefeated to start the season at 2-0. Ottawa's obviously my early season disappointment. Like, look, I came into the season. What did I rank Ottawa? Third? I mean, this team is objectively not the same team without Drew Brown at quarterback. I mean, I think that probably goes without saying. This is a drop in quality of opponent versus Ottawa's first two games. That's also part of it. They've played two pretty good teams here to start the season. So that's part of what the results that we've seen. And this is a lesser opponent. I don't think anybody's going to disagree, hopefully not anyway, that this is a lesser opponent for the REDBLACKS. This should be their easiest game of the season. But they're tough to trust right now, especially on the defensive side. They're allowing 35 points a game, and the offense is not sustaining the long drives that give the defense a chance, really. So it's tough to trust them, especially on the defensive side. Drew Brown did take first team reps at practice today, so it looks like Brown will be back under center. We certainly like the prospects of that for the REDBLACKS. On Calgary's side, they win back-to-back games for the first time since week 19 and 20 of 2023. So it has been a while since the Stampeders have found some consistent success. Vernon Adams leads. This is a wild stat. This is probably the most wild stat of the first couple of weeks of the CFL season. Vernon Adams leads the CFL with 11 yards per pass attempt. 11 pass yards per pass attempt. Not completion, per attempt. He leads the league and is still looking for his first passing touchdown. How is that even possible? The Stamps have been paced by 6 touchdowns on the ground. Now, Vernon Adams does have one of those, maybe 2. I think Dedrick Mills has 3 and somebody else might have 1. So they've got 6 rushing touchdowns as a team, which has paced them on the offense. And they're going to need that run game because Reggie Bagleton had a nasty, gnarly looking knee injury. And that looms very large. They're still being very tight-lipped. They basically said, we had a number of MRIs come back and a couple of them aren't good. That's what they said. So, okay, does that mean Bagleton? Does that mean somebody else? It's very, it's almost like New England Patriots-y during the dynasty, very tight-lipped about that stuff. I don't think the news is going to be good for Bagleton. I hope I'm wrong, but I get the feeling it's not going to be good. This is actually, I think, a super tight game. I think this is probably the tightest game of the week because it's 2 teams that you have every reason in the world not to trust, but one of them has actually found a way to win games in this early part of the season, and one of them hasn't. Getting Drew Brown back at quarterback is a big deal for Ottawa, but I think I got to go with Calgary, especially now that their number against the spread has flipped. Now, when this number opened, Calgary was a 1.5 point favorite because they were at home, obviously, and you didn't really know the quarterback situation for Ottawa. Now that we kind of have some clarity, and it's probably going to be Drew Brown, that number has flipped. Calgary's now a 1.5-point dog at home, and the point total went up by a point because, they're like, okay, cool, it looks like Drew Brown's probably going to play. I'm going to go ahead and bite on that. I like the Calgary Stampeders to win this game. Again, 50-50 as to whether Brown is 100% or just healthy enough to play sort of thing. I think it was a hip injury for Brown, and that can be, weird for any semi-mobile quarterback. So I'm going to take the Calgary Stampeders here to extend their record to 3-0. I don't know how long it's been since they won 3 games in a row, but if they win, I'm sure I'll tell you next week. Let's take Calgary to get the win over Ottawa. So on the line, obviously, I'm taking Calgary plus that 1.5. So that's one of those things where I'm either going to go 2-0 or go 0-2. And it happens. Total in the game's at 51.5 points. I like the over here. It's 2 offenses, especially when Brown's under center, that can put points on the board in bunches. And even without Reggie Bagleton, they've got receiving options. Dedrick Mills is off to a pretty darn good start to the season. So give me an over in this one. Over 51.5 points in Calgary, Ottawa. I'm going to go like a 30-26. 30-26. Calgary gets the win. Give me the plus 1.5 on the Calgary Stampeders and over the 51.5 point total. And the last game we're going to look at is the rematch from last week, this time taking place in BC, where the Lions are going to play host to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. And it's just crazy how deep the Bombers consistently are year after year. Because what happens last week, their season opening game, no Zach Collaros, an early injury to Brady Oliveira, and it still equals a 2-possession win against a team that they're probably going to have to pay attention to when it comes playoff time. Like, still one of the better teams in the West Division of the BC Lions, and Winnipeg still won the game by multiple possessions. And that just speaks to the depth on that team. Chris Streveler came out, had like the best passing game of his entire career, I think. 3 touchdowns, he had a pick. It was a little under 300 yards, but he looked like a CFL passing quarterback, which I can't always say he has in the past. And Matthew Peterson steps up in the absence of Brady Oliveira to run for a $130 and a rush touchdown. Probably looking at a couple more starts here because I don't think Brady Oliveira is going to be healthy for the next few weeks. Nick Dembski also saying like, hey guys, I'm still here and I'm still elite. 2 touchdowns on just 5 targets, I think it was. Crazy numbers for Dembski. On the Lions side of things, Nathan Rourke leaves the game early last week after 307 all-purpose yards, a pass touchdown, and a rush touchdown. He injured his oblique and originally was kind of looking, touch and go as to whether he'd be available to play, but he did take first-team reps at practice today, so it does look like it's probably going to be Nathan Rourke back under center again. Obviously, that is a good thing for the BC Lions. They do have Jeremiah Masoli there waiting in the wings, but I think everyone can agree you probably want Nathan Rourke back there. Lions have been a little bit Jekyll and Hyde here to start the season. Obviously, a big win in their first game, and then last week they kind of got humbled against an elite Western team. But this is definitely a team that's got revenge in mind, and they get to play at home. I think this is a tighter game than last week. It's just very tough for me to kind of bet against the depth of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and they're going to be getting Zach Collaros back this week. Also likely that they get Dalton Schoen back this week. This offense should look about as good this week as it's going to most of the season, of course, without, Brady Oliveira, who is a massive piece of the offense. But again, last week, Matthew Peterson showed that he is capable of carrying the load. They're going to ask him to do it again this week. I think I got to take Winnipeg here again. I think Winnipeg sweeps this little mini home and home series here. Let's take the Bombers on the road to beat the Lions. On the line, the Lions are taking plus 2.5 here as a home dog. I like Winnipeg to win. The minus 2.5 is a small price to pay, so let's lay the minus 2.5 on Winnipeg. Total in the game set at 50.5 points. I think I like the over here. Again, with Winnipeg getting those offensive pieces back, of course, without Oliveira, and BC looking like they're going to be going with Rourke again and should be fine to play, and all the weapons that they've got on the offensive side, I like an over here. Let's go over the 50.5 point total in Winnipeg, BC. I don't think it's going to fly over like a 27, a 20, 28, 24, something like that. I think all my scores are fairly similar this week. Let's go like a 28 to 24. I think this is relatively close. Winnipeg 28, BC 24, laying the -2.5 on the Bombers and taking an over on the 50.5 point total. And here's my caveat. We're about to talk about CFL Fantasy. My caveat is it's early in the week, so this could change. But my current Week 3 CFL Fantasy roster is right in front of your eyes right now. We're going to go ahead and we're going to be grabbing ourselves some Saskatchewan Roughriders this week. We are going to be stacking Trevor Harris at quarterback with Keyshawn Johnson at wide receiver, who again, I talked about, I feel like he has a bit more of a consistent floor with a high ceiling, so we grab him in fantasy. We're also going to take the Riders defense, because again, if Nick Arbuckle is starting, he's thrown up a number of interceptions. I think it could be a good day for the Riders on the defensive side. I made the commitment in fantasy this week I was not going to spend up at running back. I wasn't getting the right price, so on the top options like a Dedrick Mills or a James Butler, I just didn't feel like I was getting the right price. So we're going to spend down at running back while still taking two guys who are very involved in their offenses. We are going to take Matthew Peterson, only like $7,000 or something like that. And we're going to take Justin Rankin, even though he's going up against a pretty elite run defense in Montreal. He's very involved in the pass game. This is a volume business in fantasy. So I like Peterson and I like Rankin. And again, was not going to spend up for the higher options. We're going to go Braylon Addison. He has been a target and reception machine here in the first couple of weeks and seems to be a little quarterback proof, because even when Drew Brown wasn't available, kind of with the injury, Addison's numbers stayed the same. So we're going to have faith in Braylon Addison. And I had nothing for the Montreal Alouettes, no piece of their offense at all. So we're going to grab Tyson Philpott there in the flex. There you go, folks. Those are my picks and those are my plays for Week 3 in the CFL. We'll go over them here with you one more time. I've got the Montreal Alouettes beating the Edmonton Elks in Edmonton, laying the 5.5 on Montreal, taking an under on the 48.5 point total. I got the Saskatchewan Roughriders on the road in Toronto, beating the Argos, laying the -2.5 on Saskatchewan, staying under the 48.5 point total. I got the Calgary Stampeders moderately upsetting the Ottawa REDBLACKS in Calgary, taking the +1.5 on the Stamps and going over the 51.5 point total. And I got the Winnipeg Blue Bombers on the road in BC, beating the Lions, laying -2.5 on Winnipeg and taking the over on the 50.5 point total. That's it for me, Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter. You may notice I'm not wearing a CFL shirt this week. Maybe we improve our puck luck, our proverbial puck luck here a little bit by not wearing a CFL shirt. We'll see what happens. Enjoy the games in Week 3. We'll see you again for Week 4.